Well, from this non-dual perspective, I mean, we're not going to get rid of thought. I mean, thought is very much an expression of life. So in relation to thought, it becomes a consideration of what thought is actually telling us. So most people believe that their stories about life are somehow true. And yet, if we examine the whole process of thought, we can very easily see that thought can't be telling us the truth. So for instance, everyone who lives life for a relative amount of time, like 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, you will eventually start to say that everything in life is changing, because that's just a fact. I mean, we try to hang on to thoughts and they shift. We try to hang on to certain moods and they shift. We want our relationships to be a certain way and they shift. We want our job situations to be a certain way and they shift. And we want our bodies to be a certain way, and they shift. So at a certain point, we will all announce to ourselves and the world that everything is changing. So, immediately we come to what actually all of the great religions are saying, because if you tell me that everything is changing, you must be saying that existence is a formless event or a formless presence. Like the happening of this moment is actually formless, because our most basic sense of all of the apparent things in life are that they're changing. So life itself can't actually have a specific form. Now these forms are changing very slowly, but we know that if these were left out in a garden somewhere, they would slowly rust away. And it's the same with the buildings. If they were left without being maintained in any way on any regular basis, the glass would dry out, the putty would dry out, the plaster would dry out, the mortar between the bricks would dry out, and the whole thing would eventually, over time, turn to powder. And that powder would become so small, we would say that it's returned to the form of energy. So it's just a simple acknowledgement that life is this moving, shifting event. So in all the various religions and all of the non-dual teachings, they will eventually say that what actually exists is the Great Spirit. So, I mean, what's a better way to refer to this moving, shifting, dancing event? It's a Great Spirit, or another group would say it's the unformed river of life, or the unformed ocean of life. The Taoists would say it's simply the way, and it's very much like the flowing of water. So they're simply pointing to what we experience right now, everything we see. Wang Po, the great Zen master, would say to people, Buddha nature, Buddha mind, this is everything you're seeing right now, and it has no form. So it's everything we see outside of us and everything we apparently see inside of us if we close our eyes and we experience what we would call the inside of us. We just find a moving, shifting event. If we have our eyes closed and we're experiencing the happening of this apparent body and the process that we are, you have this very obviously a moving, shifting event. Pulsation, vibration, warmth, coolness, tightness, looseness, thoughts coming and going, moods coming and going. So you have this moving, shifting, dancing event. Now, if we look out here, we have the weather changing. We can see in our physical appearance, if we look in the mirror, we see that our bodies are changing a little bit quicker than we would like them to change. The buildings change a little more slowly. The mountains change even more slowly, but they are all changing. So in Manitoba, we have a very old mountain range, and it used to be a very dynamic mountain range, but now it's just a bunch of big hills. So, immediately our world of thought becomes suspect, because if I ask you what life is about, what the universe is about, you're going to describe form to me. You're going to give me a story about a whole bunch of forms, but you're also telling me that forms aren't the legitimate truth of existence. So there's a major contradiction there. And along with that, even in our storylines, we have a story that says when we came out of the womb, we didn't have a story. And every one of us has the storyline that says, our mothers taught us certain words, our father taught us certain words, our school system taught us certain words, and at a certain point, it all became very complex. We had these labels, we had these various descriptions of definite forms and less definite forms, like emotions and notions of awareness. And we join them all together and we end up with these major storylines. But if we look at those labels, you know, if I call this a chair, if I'm born in an English-speaking country, then my mother teaches me to call this a chair and to call this a nose and to call this an ear. If I'm born in France, I get a different set of labels. If I'm born in Russia, I get a different set of labels. And actually the labels mean nothing. They only take on meaning when they point to an apparent form. So if we all agreed, instead of saying words like body and awareness and consciousness, we could just agree to use words like blix and flute and wassail. Now, you can sit around all afternoon having coffee with a friend and you can talk about bodies and awareness and consciousness and feel like you really know something. And yet it's exactly the same as sitting around talking about blix and flute and wassail. It means nothing. They're meaningless sounds. I mean, they have some practical value. Like if I'm thirsty and I ask for a glass of water, then, you know, whatever this actually is that I call thirst and whatever this is that we actually call water, it's not thirst and it's not water, but it's helpful to ask for a glass of water and I can quench the thirst. But if we ask it to tell us what reality is, that's a whole other issue. Like, I can use a hammer as a useful tool, but I'm not going to ask the hammer what reality is. And I can use thought as a useful tool, but I'm not going to ask thought to tell me what reality is, because the whole process of thought is simply meaningless sound attached to forms that don't actually exist. So how are they possibly telling us anything about reality? So there's apparent form, and we're never going to get rid of that. There's apparent form, and some of these apparent forms are changing so slowly that they will seem very, very stable. Now, if we were watching smoke curling up from an incense stick, we would be able to see certain curls of smoke that look like the letter C. But in the exact moment that we identify that as the letter C, it's gone. So it essentially has no particular form. Now, with something like a mountain or a house, it's changing more slowly, and we obviously can't see the subtle changes that are taking place, but the whole world of science will tell us that there are subtle changes taking place, and that in metal columns, as time goes by, the columns actually get more dense down at the bottom than at the top, because there's a free-flowing waterfall of molecules coming down to the base of the column. So within this non-dual perspective, ultimately you end up having to say, like, if you're drawn to this, and everything I'm offering today is just for your consideration. I'm not saying you have to have a non-dual perspective. It's not the one true view of existence. It's just one of the mysterious expressions of existence. If you're drawn to it, great, it's very important. If you're not drawn to it, it's not important. It's not a big deal. But if you are drawn to it, like, ultimately you're going to have to acknowledge that we have no tool for talking about existence on the level of a reality. We don't have any way of saying what's happening here and now. And we don't really need to have an explanation for existence. Like right now, like here we are, existence is happening. If you don't have an explanation for it, it's no problem. It's happening anyway. It becomes just simply this great mysterious event. You know, if we sit down and we're making no effort to do anything at all, we still are going to have thoughts coming and going. We're going to have what we call moods coming and going. All of that is a natural expression of existence. Now, there's this funny situation with the world of thought, because it seems to have so much importance. It seems to, like, we're hoping that, you know, one of our most fundamental ways of trying to escape life is we want to understand it. So life is difficult, life has some tough situations, and we would like it to get to a place where it wasn't so difficult and it doesn't have any tough situations. So one of the ways we would like to do that is to come up with a real explanation of existence, because if I could just understand it, I would be happy all the time. And the fact of the matter is, none of us understand what's going on here. You know, the world of physics, and I think around 1938 they gathered in Copenhagen, all the physicists, and they asked the question very directly, do any of our explanations have anything to do with reality? And the general consensus was, no, it has nothing to do with reality. It's just a working matrix for dealing with existence on a day-to-day basis. So part of this is to see that the thoughts essentially aren't telling us any truth about life. Like, you need them on a day-to-day basis, or they will push themselves forward on a day-to-day basis, just because that's part of the expression of existence, and it's part of what we are in our functioning. However, you may begin to consider that that dance of thought is a totally automatic dance. Like even if you pay no attention to it, it's going to dance around on its own anyway. So a lot of the times in meditation practices, people sit down and they think the idea is to get rid of their world of thought. And it's not to get rid of the world of thought. It's simply to rest with the event that life is. Because it's simply an event. And this is where it gets very subtle, because people think the answer is going to come in a specific event, like a moment of golden light where there's all kinds of energy shifts and you move into some place where everything is just beatific from that point on, just one big blissful happening. That's not going to happen. Nobody gets that. There's always a moving, shifting, dancing event, and it's more to acknowledge that we're not doing it, we don't exist as anything apart from it, and we don't have to be concerned about it, because the whole thing is flowing like a river, or it's moving like the changing of the seasons. It's just presenting whatever it presents. And it doesn't matter how much understanding you have, it's going to present your apparent life with ups and downs, happiness and sadness, joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion. It's always going to be moving on to something else. You know, the apparent thoughts that you're having now, they're gone. They're already moving on to something else. The apparent mood you're in right now, it's gone. It's already moving on to something else. It may be shifting in a subtle way so that the change doesn't seem so obvious, but, you know, later on this afternoon, whatever mood you're in now, I mean, even if you're happy to see me now, later this afternoon, you might be thinking, oh, God, you know, tell this guy to shut up. It's like... Basically, we're after about 4 different things. I mean, the Buddha was pretty clear about this. I didn't like the specific phrasing that he used in the last point, so I've changed it a bit. But basically, we feel that we're somebody separate from the movement of existence, and in order to be happy, we have to turn existence into something in particular. So we're running after 4 basic things. We're running after ongoing pleasure. So sights, sounds, touches, tastes, smells, and thoughts, we want them to be pleasant, and we don't want the unpleasant. The second thing we're generally running after is understanding. So again, we're feeling that if we could just understand existence, everything would be much better and I wouldn't suffer. If I could just understand why it was so difficult, then I wouldn't feel like I was suffering through this whole thing. The third thing we're basically looking for is a sense of self that never suffers a feeling of inadequacy or insecurity or loneliness. And the fourth thing we're looking for is we're looking for systems and techniques to accomplish the first 3. And basically the whole spiritual journey is one long journey of disappointment, because because you're going to find out that you can't have any of those things. You can't have endless pleasure. You can't have an understanding of existence. You can't have a sense of self. It doesn't matter whether you're thinking in terms of no self or big self or whatever self. You're just not going to have a sense of life where you're always feeling secure and confident and never lonely and never having your fearful moments. It doesn't matter who you are. Like, you're going to have confusion at some point. Life will present situations that are confusing. And you're just never going to find a system or technique to control life in any kind of ultimate way. Now, this isn't to say that you should sit around doing nothing all the time. It's just, eventually this is pointing to the fact that this is an event. It's presenting itself, and it presents itself in whatever way it presents itself, and we're part of the expression. We're going to be presented in whatever way we're presented. To acknowledge that very fully, we can simply relax, because the whole, as I said, the whole thing is moving in this, the same way that the seasons shift, that a river flows. It's just moving automatically. It's part of the expression of the universe. And in fact, the word universe means undivided turning. I mean, that literally, that's its translation. Uni meaning undivided, verse from the French root ver, to turn. So it's undivided turning. So to acknowledge this big, mysterious, undivided dance happening automatically, you begin to realize life will just play out in whatever way it plays out. It's a totally mysterious happening. in any particular moment, it's the only way it's going to present itself. It's not like we did something wrong and if only we had done it differently. It's like it's just presenting itself the way it's presenting itself. The bottom line meditation in all the major meditation traditions is you just sit down and do absolutely nothing. You sit here, you do absolutely nothing, and maybe you discuss a bit that thought itself is just a mysterious presentation, a mysterious dance, moving and shifting. And so you sit here and the heart's beating and the moods are shifting and the thoughts are coming and going, and there's pulsation and vibration and warmth and coolness, and there's pulsations, and there's a little twinge here and a little shift there, and then it gets really painful after a certain amount of time, and you're just kind of dancing in your seat, and it's like it's all just happening. And that's all you have to acknowledge. Like once in a while when Jiddu Krishnamurti would really get down to saying what it was all about, he would say that it was, and he very rarely did, so rare occasion, he would say, just acknowledge the movement, that you don't have to analyze it. You can't analyze it. There's no way of explaining what it is. You can't dissect it conceptually because all of that's just fantasy. All you have to do is acknowledge the event. And basically that's what they all say. Like Nisargadatta Maharaj, shortly before he died, there's a last little book, a transcript of his teachings. It's called Consciousness and the Absolute. And so he explains in there how through most of his teaching years he thought he was something called consciousness, and he realized closer to the end of his life he realized that no, that's just some weird idea, that he wasn't conscious at all. And so he would say there's just this dynamic function. So they point to this unexplainable movement. So in the Christian terminology, for the ones who are really approaching Christianity in this way, they will say God is a verb, not a noun. Just meaning God is this eventing. It's not something that's separate from the eventing. Within the Bible, you've got all these really wonderful expressions. So somebody asks God, who are you? And God says, I am the I am. So I am the amness, the isness of this moment. And then later on it says God is spirit. So once again, the amness, the isness is one moving, shifting, dancing event. And it is in God that we live and move and have our being. And within the last few paragraphs of the Bible, in the book of Revelations, it says, the John that wrote the book of Revelations, it's not the John that wrote the Gospel of John, but the John who wrote the book of Revelations eventually says, an angel of God revealed to me the river that flows down the center of the city of God, and the mark of man is removed. So again, there's this reference to this river, this flowing, and Christ just stated it outright. The wind blows wherever it blows. You can't know where it's coming from, and you can't know where it's going to. And that's the non-dual acknowledgement. All of this is going to do whatever it's going to do. In the resting with the moment, it's not so much getting rid of the thought, but realizing thought is very limited in what it's offering to us. And we become more comfortable acknowledging thought as just this mysterious happening. We don't even have to call it thought. And even with the strongest thought, like in this moment, you have this feeling of what we would call pressure, there where the body touches the chair. Now, we don't have to call it pressure. And it makes itself obvious. What we call pressure is a happening that isn't a thought. And it's just as strong as any thought. So in a meditation session, what you would call a meditation session, I don't really care for that word. These days I'm using acknowledging the moment, but acknowledging the happening of the moment. But it's really permission to simply acknowledge the full event of this moment. Like right now you have what you call seeing, hearing, touching, all the tactile sensations, tasting, smelling, and thinking. So thinking is about this much of it, and we're always focused on this much of it instead of the full event. So this is the fragmentation. We're always pulling the fullness of life down into this small, divided world. And it's a world of conflict. Because in the world of apparent form, I'd say, this is a piece of paper, and this is a glass of water. Now, in order to get the sense that this is somehow different to this, we have to focus on this apparent form and this apparent form, and then we put them in opposition to each other. So the world of thought is always opposition. And most of the time when we're lost in thought, it doesn't seem like a big conflict. But if you keep focused on thought and you keep believing the stories that it's telling, and when you believe the stories that it's telling, you then, like your hold on the world of thought increases because you really think you're figuring something out, you really think you're understanding something. But the longer you stay in it, the more there's a feeling of conflict because it is always in opposition. And eventually you start looking at somebody else and saying, yeah, they're better than I am. You know, I'm not quite as accomplished as that person. So it's very odd that human beings, you know, if we walk into any amazing forest anywhere, it could be a tropical forest, it could be a West Coast temperate forest, we walk into those forests and we're just amazed at all of the expressions of nature. The little insects, all of the various plant life, the mighty trees, everything is just an amazing expression of nature. We're not going to the small trees, the short trees, and saying, if you had tried a little harder, you could have been this mighty cedar. And we don't go up to the beetle and say, you know, if you'd found just the right spiritual practice, you could have been a butterfly. It makes no sense. Yet we go home and look in the bathroom mirror, and it's like, you're not okay. There's something wrong with you. Like, why don't we see ourselves as one of the wild, exotic expressions of existence? Like, what is the difference? The difference is, and this is the thing, like, a lot of times non-dual presenters will, you know, they'll kind of avoid considering thought, and people sometimes think they're trying to sweep aside our daily life and sweep aside the world of thought, sweep aside the various storylines that we have. I know in my case, I was, you know, early on, I was focusing mainly on the fact that this is an event which takes care of itself. And I thought, well, that's pretty obvious. So, I mean, it'll be pretty obvious to everyone else, but it isn't quite obvious to everyone else. So I'm now having to, or wanting to point out that, you know, to talk about the formless happening that's just happening on its own, you're also talking about this world of apparent form. The world of apparent form and the world of stories is the formless event expressing itself. And not only do you have to have thought in living your life, you can't avoid it. You are being expressed with thoughts. You are being expressed with this apparent perception of form. And there's no way around it. That's all the dance of this larger, mysterious, formless expression of existence. And ultimately in that, ultimately in that, it has to be an acknowledgement of your unique adventure, because within the world of apparent form, another thing we end up having to acknowledge is that each and every form is unique. Like, they tell us you can't find any two snowflakes that are identical. I mean, have you ever considered how many snowflakes have existed in existence? And no two of them can be identical. It's one of the, you know, it's a very simple water molecule, but no two of them are identical. And we even have this weird idea that somehow it's somewhat symmetrical, that you know, it's somewhat circular and it's geometric and it's got these beautiful patterns, but that's not true. I mean, it's just a big scam. It's like, you know, again, we all want to live in Disneyland. Everything has to be pretty. In fact, most snowflakes look like distorted pieces of metal. Like when they're blowing up, the actual shape of them is just some bizarre piece of metal that arises with sharp barbs and all kinds of a distorted look to them. But the basic thing I'm pointing to here is that within the world of form, apparent form, each of us is unique. Now, I used to just leave it as each of us is unique, and I thought, well, people will get the message from that, but they don't. So here it is. You have to be different from absolutely every other person on the face of the earth. There's nothing you can do about it. So if you're sitting here listening to me thinking, oh, he's got a pretty good view of life, and he's, you know, he seems pretty easygoing about it, this realization must have made him this way. Just drop that thought now, because it's like, you can't have my exact sense of existence. The world doesn't need, or existence doesn't need another me. The demand is you. It needs each and every one of you. You're the legitimate expression of existence, just as you are, in each and every moment. And that's the ultimate expression of non-duality. Like, it's, again, like, I'm really puzzled by, people have been going to various presenters for like 20 years, and they walk away feeling less adequate than when they went to the teacher. Like, this is ridiculous. I mean, the ultimate message in non-duality is that there's a big event doing what it does, and each and every apparent form that's expressed is a legitimate expression of this great mysterious happening. But it's a demand. I mean, if you're drawn to this, the demand is that you will have to be the wild, exotic expression that you are. And I know a lot of people, they hear these words and they think, well, it'd probably be pretty difficult for me to look in the bathroom mirror and think I'm a wild, exotic expression, but you are, in your uniqueness. You are. In the same way that you go to that tropical forest and you admire all of the exotic birds and all of the exotic bugs, and or you stand out under a night sky in the desert somewhere, and it's just, endless stars forever, and it's just this massive happening that you can't really comprehend. And you're not standing there saying, yeah, that constellation would have looked a bit better over near, like near Pleiades. It would have really worked, but hasn't quite worked. You don't do that. And again, we go home, we look in the bathroom mirror and say, what's wrong with me? Like, there must be something wrong with me. Most of us have the feeling that everything in existence is the expression of nature or the expression of the universe. So you don't have the impression that a squirrel is deciding its career as a squirrel. You don't have the feeling that a rock is rocking incorrectly. We have the feeling that absolutely everything in existence is an expression of nature, an expression of the universe, an expression of the laws of the universe. Everything except one thing: human beings. We run the universe. I can sit down and have a conversation with any one of you, and I'll ask you, have you created your body? No. Have you created your brain? No. Right now, are you making them function? Like, are you somehow overseeing the beating of the heart or the synaptic firing of all the cells in your brain? No. Have you created your needs? No. Have you created your interests? Well, no, I like this and I don't like that. And have you created your concerns? No. Have you created your abilities? No, I can do this, but I have great difficulty doing this. Have you created your lack of abilities? No. But I am in charge. I am really directing myself through life. I'm the one in charge. And we have this general sense of existence. And so that's the difference. We can go to the tropical forest, and that's an amazing expression of nature. Each and every expression is to be honored in some way, even if we don't like it, even if it's dangerous. Like, this doesn't make us stupid. And it's amazing how much human beings want to hang on to this notion. Like the scientists right now, with all the neurological explorations that they're doing, they're coming up with these wild experiments. Like, they have one experiment where they tell you to hold a button in each hand, and then they tell you within a certain period of time, press one of the buttons, and just before you're going to press that button, tell us you've decided to press the button and press it. So they find out, they wire your brain up to monitor all of the activities in the brain. And what they discover is 7 seconds before you even know you're going to make a decision, they know you're going to make a decision, and they know what decision you're going to make. Before you even know you're going to make a decision. So now people are saying, well, that makes it very difficult to feel like we're actually in charge. Like, somehow the brain is functioning on its own before we're even conscious that we're going to make a decision. It's already doing everything that's involved with the activity that we're thinking we're going to decide to do. So now the scientists are saying, well, okay, so maybe we don't have free will in that way, but We do have the freedom to stop the action somehow, like they're really wanting to hang on to this notion of being in charge, because if they don't, they think it means determinism, fate. But it doesn't really mean that. It means that within the world of storylines, but none of the storylines apply. So people will often have the impression that, they hear a non-dual presenter, they think they're saying there is no free will. But they're not saying that. They're saying there is no free will and there is no fate. These descriptions don't apply to what's going on here. Flat out, they don't apply. So that was the Buddha's ultimate statement. Descriptions do not apply. So he called himself the Tathagata, and it just means one who is to thusness come, or one who is to thusness gone, meaning he's come to the thusness of existence, the isness, the suchness of existence. And he said, one who is to thusness come no longer describes existence in terms of physical forms, feelings, perceptions, mental activities, or states of consciousness. Descriptions do not apply. So all of, these 5 basic groupings of description, physical form, feelings, perceptions, mental activities, or states of consciousness, these basically house all of our descriptions of life. And he said, he just stated outright, none of them really apply. Now, it didn't mean that he never had an apparent thought. It just means that when the thoughts came and went, he knew it was just some strange happening. Like, the only reason we call them thought is somebody told us to call them thought. There's just some strange dance of something, some apparent thing, but there's no way of saying what it is.